Hello, fellow lovers of the liminal and the weird, and welcome to another video by Liminal Spaces. Today I'm going to be talking about more Stephen King books. This is the third video of me going over my Stephen King library. I know for a long time I've kind of avoided talking about Stephen King on this channel, even though I absolutely loved reading his work as a teenager. He was the first adult writer that I ever really loved and read all of his work. But I've come to the letter K in my horror library, so we're going through all of the Stephen King books, and we're still in the chunk of the books that I have read of his, that I read religiously. We're going to come to a point where I stopped reading, but we are not there yet. We're going to be talking about his early 80s output, and we ended with Cujo. We had just done Cujo and Dance Macabre. So yeah, Cujo was early 80s, and an interesting thing happened in that he published a book, not through his usual publisher, and I can't remember if it was only through the fan club you could get it, but I did not know when this book came out that it even existed. I didn't get it till way later. And this is one of the most expensive first edition Stephen King books you can get, and I'm not about to pull out a first edition. Unfortunately, all I have is the first trade paperback edition, and that is The Dark Tower, The Gunslinger. This is also the first Stephen King book that has some really cool art. And this art is done by Michael Whelan, which is cool. I just opened that and didn't realize that. Michael Whelan, of course, to me is what I know him best for is Elric. He did all the Elric stuff, but also he did the cover for a lot of the Piers Anthony series, Incarnations of Immortality, which I absolutely loved as a kid. So yeah, the first time that Stephen King has illustrations in his books, and it's really not a horror book, although some pretty intense, horrible stuff does happen in here. This is the only book from The Dark Tower that I've completed. I started reading the second one, and I didn't complete it. And here's why. And I know I always ask a lot of you guys on this video, because I talk shit about books that a lot of you love, that eventually I also come to love. But when I read them as a teenager, I didn't have such... Okay, sorry, I don't know what I was saying. My kid was yelling in the other room, and I had to go see what was going on. She was on Discord playing a game, yelling with her friends. Okay, so when I was young, I didn't... The fact that suddenly Stephen King was writing about cowboys was hard for me, because I didn't find cowboys cool when I was young. I hadn't, seen Fistful of Dollars and that kind of stuff. It was what my parents liked to play when they were kids. I didn't care about cowboys. I wanted werewolves and ghosts and stuff like that. So this was a weird one for me, and I did read it when I was a kid, and I just kind of put it down as one of the weirdest Stephen Kings that I've ever read. But I reread it recently, and holy moly, this is wild. This is a wild book. First off, it is kind of horror. There's some horrible stuff that happens in here, and it's about drive and obsession. In a weird way, it's like The Old Man and the Sea, right? Just obsessed. Our character Roland is absolutely obsessed with meeting the man in black, getting to the man in black. And he has a tendency to sacrifice everything, love, and even a kind of familial relationship with a young man in order to catch this man in black. He does awful, awful things, and that's what this novel's about. But when he sits down, when he finally catches up to this man in black and has this weird ass conversation, that it's the type of mind-bending Stephen King that I fell in love with, because the next day he wakes up and some incredible amount of years have passed while these two men were conversing. It's small, it's incredible, and it says so much in these few pages. And that's what I love about it, is it's Stephen King allowing himself to not bloat, to just very succinctly tell a story. It's a good one. I know for a lot of you, it's the best one. A lot of people were brought into Stephen King through this and prefer his fantasy over his horror. All right, next is Different Seasons. I do have a very beat up first edition of this. Oh, that's not even true. This is a first edition, but it's a fourth printing. This is one that I need to get a first edition of, but it's very hard because this also sees Stephen King going in a different direction. It's so interesting when we look at the trajectory of Stephen King, because we have Carrie, and we have Salem's Lot, and we have The Shining, which are all straight up horror. And he becomes the main writer of the horror boom because of those three books. And then we get The Stand, which could be considered horror, but for me, when you read it, is more adventure. It's more kind of a post-apocalyptic fantasy. So you see him kind of moving away. And then you get The Dead Zone and Firestarter that are, I guess I could call them horror. To me, they seem more like dramas with psychic powers. And then you have Cujo, where he makes a return to horror, but it's not supernatural. And then you get the Dark Tower, which is like a fantasy western. And then you get Different Seasons, which is 4 novellas. And the first one is The Shawshank Redemption, which is actually called Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption. And this became, of course, a huge movie. And Stephen King tells a story in a lot of his interviews where he goes into a grocery store and is talking to an older lady there, and somehow it comes up that he's a writer, and she says, "What kind of stuff do you write?" And he says, "Oh, I write horror. I hope I'm telling this story right." And she says, "Oh, you should write nice things like that Shawshank Redemption. That's really good literature." And he tells her that he wrote it, and she doesn't believe him. Yeah, this is a story about a man being incarcerated who is innocent in his eventual escape. And some horrible things happen, but this is a drama. This is not... like horror is not the first thing that comes to mind with this at all. Then you have Apt Pupil, which is psychological thriller horror. This is about a young man that finds out that there's a Nazi hiding in the town, and he blackmails him to tell him all these terrible stories of what he did and how this tears apart the Nazi, but also sends this kid down a path. I think they also did a movie of this, but I watched the movie. I barely remember it, but I will never forget the ending of this story when I read it as a young man. Then you got The Body, of course, became the movie Stand By Me, which is a period piece about growing up in the 50s. I wouldn't call that horror at all, but it's still wonderful. And then it ends with the novella The Breathing Method, which a lot of people says is some of the best work in the book. And I'll be honest, it's the one I don't remember. Like, I read this whole book when I was younger, and I remember those first 3 stories, and I don't remember The Breathing Method at all. I have no idea what The Breathing Method's about, but I'm going to have to go back and reread it, because it sounds like, I mean, a lot of people say it's really good, so I'll have to give it a reread. So we see this, what I feel is kind of a moving away from horror from Stephen King. He's trying a lot of new stuff, and he's moving away from horror, and then we get a real strong return to horror, and that's with Christine. This is a first edition of Christine, $16.95 on the dust flap. Cool picture of Stephen King there on a, what is that? Is that a Plymouth Fury? Yeah, it must be. Stephen King and Friend, it says underneath there. Super cool. I wonder if that can't be the one from the... No, it's not the one from the movie. Yeah, we see Stephen King return to horror, and I can't imagine... I think it would be hard to continuously put out Like if somebody just tasked us and said, hey, you're the new Stephen King. You need to write once a year a new horror novel. Like, how often would you have to fall back on old horror tropes? Stephen King took some real risks. And I have very fond memories of this book. And sometimes I see this listed as one of Stephen King's worst, but I really liked it. I like the idea of a haunted car. It's a cursed object. I like this idea. I think it went really well. And I love the film, and we should try to talk about the films. I never saw the film they made out of the Dark Tower. I did see the 3 films from here that they made. I don't think they ever made a film of The Breathing Method. Of course, Shawshank Redemption's a classic, apt pupil. I remember the book more than the movie. I saw the movie more recently, but for me, that one was kind of forgettable. And then, of course, Stand By Me is huge. I loved that movie growing up. But I also loved this movie. I thought it was wonderful. I mean, the special effects in that movie were incredible. I watched it over and over as a kid. We get to see that Plymouth Fury, and then what does his buddy drive? A Dodge Charger, I think a '69 Dodge Charger, which is beautiful. There's so many good-looking cars in that movie, and the way he did I assume he reversed the camera to do Christine's effects. It's great, and it really did scare me when I was a kid. I think this is a wonderful book that shows Stephen King trying to remain scary without rewriting the same ghost story over and over and over again. Because I think it would be hard to be Stephen King. I know, of course, he's rich and doing great and has lots of ideas, so it's not hard to be him, but I think it would be hard to continuously come up with ideas in the same genre over and over and over again. So, yeah, I did like Christine. I thought it was good. Next up, we have Stephen King's scariest novel, in my opinion, and maybe in Stephen King's opinion as well. That is, of course, Pet Sematary. And this is my first edition copy of Pet Sematary, $15.95 on the dust jacket. And it says first edition on the copyright page. A lot of the times when I talk about this, the way that I'm trying to talk about Stephen King is by making it personal, because people have talked about all these novels much better than I could over and over again on BookTube. This novel hit very hard at just the right time, because I received this novel and started reading it right after one of my brothers passed away. So there's a brother that Jason and I had in between us, and he passed away when I was 11 years old. And about 6 months after that, I started reading Pet Sematary, and nothing has scared me more than reading this book after my brother's death. It was wild. And I know Stephen King tells a wonderful story about this book, because he thought he had broken ground into something too terrible, so much so that he threw it in a drawer and didn't plan on publishing it. And I think he wrote this, if I understand correctly, right after The Shining. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but he had moved Colorado and they lived on a highway, and he let his imagination go in the worst way that it could towards the idea of, I think one of his children almost was run down by a semi on that road that they lived off of. And he thought to himself, what if that had really happened? How far would a parent go in order to bring back a lost child? And I'll tell you, there's nothing like losing a child for a parent, or a brother for a family, to just tear a family to shreds. It's wild. And this book, I think, is a pretty accurate representation of how far people will go to undo that pain. It's incredible. It's incredible. It's one of my favorites, but one of my least read Stephen King books because of how close to home it hits. Great movie. The old one, of course, from this novel, a classic, that movie. So, yeah, really good one, and in my opinion, Stephen King's scariest. Here comes another kind of off-the-cuff, slightly strange one. Oh, I did want to mention that this, to me, was a huge return to horror for Stephen King. All the stuff that I was talking about before that had an interesting kind of quirkiness to it. But these two were a huge return to horror. We get the haunted object trope in this one, and this one we get a modern, terrifying retelling of the monkey's paw. Right? Be careful what you wish for. Really incredible. And then he came out with Cycle of the Werewolf. And this is another book that he did. And there is a hardback of this, which I do not have. This is the trade paperback edition. But this is another one that Stephen King had illustrated. And I think this is a first trade paperback. Who's this illustrated by? If Virgil were here, he would know right away. Barry something, right? Yeah, Bernie. Illustrations by Bernie Wrightson. And this was, I think, originally going to be... It was a short story that Stephen King thought he'd make into a calendar. And then it became this novella that goes month by month. And in my opinion is one of the best werewolf stories ever told. It's incredible. And they made a movie of it that I really loved. Just straight up scary werewolf story. And I love werewolf stories. Werewolves were my favorite when I was a kid, my favorite monster, and this probably had a lot to do with that. What a wonderful book. So we had that wonderful kind of return to horror, and then Stephen King spun off again. And I can't blame him for this. I think it would be really hard to continuously write horror. But this is the only early 80s Stephen King book that I DNF'd, and that is The Talisman. And I just remember Jack walking forever, and sometimes he was in one world and sometimes he was in the other. And for me, I just, at the time that I tried to read it, could not connect. And I recently tried to reread it, and I DNF'd again. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it takes too long or what's going on in this book, but I just could not finish this. Also, I believe, spoiler, that the character in this is the young boy in this. Correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, I just can't finish this one. So yeah, we saw this jump away from horror towards fantasy, which I think he kind of practiced with here. And I haven't finished it, so I don't know if it becomes serious horror in the end. But we see, I think, a more streamlined version of this, and one that I liked much more, with The Eyes of the Dragon, which is the first time that Stephen King really just embraced fantasy writing, and I really loved this. This is a first edition. It has the embossed dragon scales on it. $18.95 on the cover flap. Yeah, so very cool. I have a picture of me reading this. I'll try to find it and put it up here, where I'm at my grandparents and everybody's having fun, and I'm laser focused on The Eyes of the Dragon by Stephen King. I was an obsessive reader when I was a kid. I really, really was. And I got out of it when I hit high school and started doing stuff I shouldn't. And then slowly, then I had to read what was assigned to me through all my college career. And I'm only really now, probably in the last 5 or 6 years, been able to pull myself back into reading, and boy am I enjoying it, and this channel helps me do that a lot. So Eyes of the Dragon, Evil Wizard, tons of fun. I really enjoyed this one. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to fit all these up here. I tried to just pull 8, hoping I could do the same thing I did before, but these 2 trade paperbacks are ruining it. I also wanted to say that this is the one I would recommend to anybody that hasn't read Stephen King, that didn't want to get into his horror stuff, that wanted to try something else. This is a good one to start with. It's really fun. So we got this kind of moving away from horror again for a little while, which again I completely understand. He goes back and forth through genres, which you'd have to. I find when I was part of a stoner rock band for many years, and I was writing all this music that specifically fit into that category. And what it made me want to do, like half the time I'd go and make stuff just for myself that was in completely different genres. On this channel, it's so hard for me to stick to just reading one genre, because I think we want to move around as creators and as consumers of entertainment. We want to move around. All right, last but not least, we have Thinner. And this is a novel by Richard Bachman. This was the last Richard Bachman novel before the story broke that Richard Bachman was Stephen King. This is a book club edition. I wish I could find a first of this, but on the back here you can see that it has the fake Richard Bachman picture. And I loved the idea of Richard Bachman, and I think Stephen King did too. He wrote The Dark Half about this concept of a pseudonym, and we'll get into that when we talk about The Dark Half. But this book, my mom read it before I did, and she gave me her copy and said, oh my God, this is Stephen King firing on all cylinders, because she wasn't a fan of his movements through here and here, which is funny because she does like fantasy quite a lot. But this, she felt, was absolutely incredible. And of course, she didn't know, we didn't get this version. This was when it became known that he was Stephen King, and they re-released it under Stephen King's name. This is the classic curse trope. Absolutely incredible. Stephen King doing his Stephen King thing. It's strange because the way I think about it, I remember when The Ring came out, and I watched The Ring, and that was back when I was starting school, and I still really wanted to be a writer, and I wanted to write a horror novel. And I talked to my brother Jason for hours about the fact that I wanted to do what The Ring did and kind of revolutionize horror. And I know that The Ring is just a cursed object trope, but the fact that it was a videotape, that it spread through modern technology instead of some old mirror or whatever, was really incredible to me. And I wanted to do something that good. And finally, my brother just said, look, it's not what you write, it's how you write it. And I think that's absolutely true with Stephen King. I mean, a lot of these are tropes that have already been done. Yeah, although this one was kind of wild and new. But the way this is written and the way that he tries to solve this curse and the tragedy that occurs because of it, absolutely incredible. Really well done, wild stuff. And of course, this led to the publication of the Bachman books because he was outed as being Stephen King. So in our next video, we will be talking about the Bachman books, which will be a lot of fun. All right, that's it for this installment of my Stephen King library. Let me grab these other two. Ta-da! There you go. 8 Stephen King books from the early 80s as we go along, following his bibliography by going over my shelf of his books. All of these I've read. I DNF'd Talisman, and next time we'll be talking about more books that I have read by Stephen King, and then we'll get into the stuff that I haven't read, and that will go a lot faster. All right, thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you next time.